Hello, everyone, and welcome to Forge Talk episode 5. I threw some links in the chat. We'll be talking about kind of primarily focusing on the two blogs about new stuff that's coming in our third title update later this year, which is due in fall as well, which is going to be alongside the Steam and the Xbox release. So
Yeah.
between this and then, we've been kind of I guess, revealing and writing up blogs and giving teasers as to what these things will look like. I'm sure there's probably
Yeah.
a bit more that will let players discover themselves
Mhm.
by actually playing the game, but we want to give you a taste of what's to come as well. Um, so yeah, for those of you new here, you're very welcome. For returning people, you're also very welcome. Welcome everybody. So yeah, I'm Claire. I'm the community manager. So do you guys want to introduce yourselves as well?
Sure. I'm Jon-Paul. I'm the game director here at Free Range Games.
And I'm Bradley Fulton. I'm the art director here on Return to Moria for Range Games.
Awesome. So I guess, do you want to get started with the cooking blog, or is there anything that you wanted to touch on before we dive into that?
Well, yeah, we could jump right into it. And one thing is, I know we'll get a lot of questions about. There's a couple of big topics that have been going around that we see asked in the Discord a lot around Xbox and around crossplay. And all we can really say is that we've got some big announcements slated for mid and late July, and then another big announcement in early August. So there'll be a lot more information coming out over the course of the next month about features like that, as well as more specific date than fall for when everything is going to come out. So those are coming, and we're excited to talk more about them.
Yeah, just crossing the T's and dotting the I's at the moment, I guess.
Yeah. Um, And I did see, I know we were going to do questions at the end, but I did see One Armed Wolf's question about the lighting, and I want to kind of make a request out to the community. We know about a bunch of the lighting issues, and we're working on fixing them as soon as we can. One thing that would really help is people taking videos when they see lights turning off, their base being darker than they thought it should be. Any video content that people could submit through the proper channels would be really helpful for us to make sure we're doing it, because it turns out it's actually like 2 or 3 different issues, and we want to make sure we fix all of them. So just a call
Yeah.
to the community: video content. When you see weird lighting stuff happening, try to get a video for us if you're possibly hooked up for that. It would be really helpful.
Yeah, I want to give a shout out before we continue to Guy, who actually sent me 2 videos just before the Forge talk, because I had mentioned it in the questions thread as well. So thank you for that. I've passed them on. And we appreciate everything people send us. If you could send them through, there's the support and feedback channel. The
Mhm.
link in there is probably the best way to make sure that we kind of get everything together and nothing gets lost in the chat and Discord. Because while we try to read everything, there are things that we can miss, and we don't want
Yeah.
to miss out on valuable information.
Cool. That said, let's jump into cooking. So, we are in the midst of also working on getting the game out to new platforms. I think everybody knows that we are counting down to when we're going to be on Steam. And everyone's really excited about that on our side, to be able to have Epic, Steam, and PlayStation 5, along with other announcements coming up. Um, we aren't just doing the work to put it on Steam, we're also continuing to make the game better. And one of the persistent things that we knew coming out of beta that we had been really wanting to get to was, how do we make the cooking system feel better? And I feel like we kind of hit the goal of something. I don't know. Bradley, you can jump in. That I feel is kind of unique, which is we have this. Maybe some people love it, some people don't, but by creating this separation of food between rations and things that you can take with you out into the world, and meals on a table, set with a tablecloth and a candle, to create this idea of you and your friends, or you on your own, come and have a meal. And I think the meal content is pretty fun and dwarfy, and the recipes are fun and dwarfy, but we consistently in our own play and our own observations of people playing felt like kind of every meal was the same. And there really wasn't much reason to think about which one you were going to do versus another. And so the blog we wrote up is a preview of an update to the cooking system we're going to do next time, or in the next update. And one of the big things we wanted to do was we really set out to at least give you a moment of interesting choice when it's time to cook. And so we started with, well, what would feel dwarfy, what would feel Tolkien, and so the first one we started with was meal times. So an idea that there are some meals that are breakfast and some are lunch and some are dinner, which we had already kind of designed a bit into, but we didn't really lean into it mechanically. So if you're looking at the blog, what we did was we designated meals as this is breakfast, this is lunch, this is dinner. And then we have the time indicator at the bottom left on the HUD. And so now if you eat you can eat whenever whatever you want. You'll still fill up your food meter, and a good amount of the complex meals will still give you health. But now instead of every meal giving you basically the same kind of well-fed buff, now you get a slightly different buff depending on what time of day you eat it. So if you eat and that we kind of wanted to again have this like this cycle, this loop of players deciding what to do, excuse me, at different times. So with breakfast, you get actually I need to remind myself, I need to double check 'cause it's so new, it's not like off the top of my head. Um, we'll have better names for them right now. There you can see even in the blog we've got our temporary names of breakfast buff, lunch buff, but breakfast buff basically um, helps with your energy. So it essentially gives you more energy as you're playing, by discounting the things that you would go out and do. Um, actually, I'm realizing that and then the dinner buff helps you with it basically gives you a bonus to restoration. So that's the time to kind of fix up, build up your base. And then, oh, Bradley, what does the lunch buff do? Oh, embarrassing. I'm on stage and I can't remember. Um,
Your lack of memory has infected me too. The point was we wanted to like reinforce kind of like a little bit of role play.
oh, it's
Like we
health
wanted,
regen.
yeah,
Yeah.
health regen. There you go. Because we wanted it to be about like I'm getting ready for my day, then I'm going out on an adventure, and then when I'm
Mhm.
exhausted from my adventure, I come back home to base to rest. But I'm also like I've gathered a bunch of resources. I'm going to put them, in my storage. I'm going to repair my base. I'm going to fix my weapons. I'm going to
Mhm.
cook meal for breakfast the next morning. And so we wanted there to be kind of like there's a domestic buff, there's a getting out and going on an
Yeah.
adventure buff. Yeah.
Yeah, so breakfast gives you a bonus to your energy, and discounts actions that take energy. The lunch buff gives you better health regeneration, and then the dinner buff gives you advantages in building and restoration. So you can see how it kind of like works into that daily cycle, and they last a good amount of time. So it's really just about timing. And then the other thing we did was we also found that once you built a hearth, kind of all the meals were on the hearth, and that the meals that were on the advanced stations, like the stove and the barbecue or the fire pit, were they were more complex, but they didn't necessarily give you a benefit for that much more ingredients. So we retuned it so that um, the ones that take more ingredients give you a much better benefit than the ones that only take one ingredient. And then we made it so that the hearths are good for like quick meals in a pinch, so a small handful of simple meals, but that the bulk of the meals, the good ones that are 2 3 4 ingredients, are going to be on the more advanced cooking stations. And hopefully that will diversify your cooking area, make your base look a little more interesting. And in our internal play tests, it created this really fun dynamic of you kind of looking at the clock and going, okay, well, the next meal I need to make is breakfast. Oh, I don't have any eggs. Oh, I remember. And suddenly, for the first time, it felt like I was going out seeking particular food ingredients rather than just kind of gathering what I had, making sure I had room for Cusdal oats for my brew. And that was kind of it. And then I just, make I don't know about you, Bradley, but it I would tend to, I just sort of accidentally would slip into ate nothing but roast meat and mushroom stew, and so now it actually feels like there's a little bit more of a diversity and a reason to pick different meals.
Yeah, because when we started, way back in the beginning, when we started, coming up with these different ingredients and the original recipes, part of the effort was to make sure that there were different things to find that would be there in Moria, and that there's a diversity in ingredients, but not every ingredient had like an equal role. And by splitting these up into the three meals and then having an adequate number of recipes for each meal, um, there's a lot of different ways you can sort of slice that, and so you get a lot more excited when you find a particular ingredient. Mushrooms are a very specific thing in the very beginning game. The examples that everyone should be familiar with. It's like, meat's used for this, and mushrooms are used for this, and cranberries are used for this, and then that pattern kind of continues throughout the game. So you get really excited when you find a new ingredient, and then they'll have each one of them will have its own time of day when it's really useful. And as you go through the game, you're going to encounter, find even more of these. So, yeah, it puts a finer point on some of the things that were true before. There was a difference between the meals, but I think some of that didn't come across as clearly as it should. And I think this really kind of crystallizes everything into a system that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah. And the to tie into the second blog we're going to talk about, one of the things that was really important for me, it was not just sort of hoovering up whatever food happens to be in front of you, but actually thinking about what you need and making sure that there is kind of there's a breakfast, lunch, and dinner that is easy to gather when you're in the Elven Quarter or the Western Halls. There is breakfast, lunch, and dinner that are appropriate or easier to gather when you're in the Deeps, as well as in Dwar Adelph and on into Baranzabar. So that you didn't feel like you had to, oh, I want food again. I got to fast travel back to the Elven Quarter. It sort of becomes a little too rote. And which again feeds into the next one with exploration is I always felt like one of the things that I was missing in my play, and I think this comes through in feedback that we've gotten, is there's these points in your play where you kind of know what you need to do, and you're really just kind of waiting on your ingots to finish being smelted, or you find like it's really fun early in the game to go into a building and smash everything, and then by the sixth building and it's just cloth scraps again, you're kind of like, ugh, what's going on? So I felt like one of the things that parts of the game that were too light and could stand to be a little more dense in terms of gameplay is in the exploration. And so part of this cooking is really thinking about the food you want, or being excited with the new recipes. You guys will see this when we launch the update. Suddenly when you see cranberries, like you beeline for them. So and it's true, and there's ones in the Deeps, and there's ones in Doradelph, and so suddenly like it's not just us, just something that's polluting my inventory. And those seeds become a lot more important because the meals that use the stuff you can only grow from seed are better now. um, but that kind of feeds into the next one of exploration, and there's a lot of stuff in the exploration blog if you guys haven't read it. But the number one, speaking as a game designer, the number one design goal for me was, I felt like there's too many times in the game where you can go minutes without feeling rewarded for exploring. I Bradley has heard me tell this story a lot of eh, going through and playing the game and descending the crystal descent and seeing a dirt plug and going, oh man, there must be something really cool behind there, and digging out the dirt plug, killing the spiders there, and realize there was nothing there. And that's just not a fun I'm sure a lot of us that are in here in the Forge talk have had an experience kind of like that. And so I really wanted to try to eliminate that. We wanted to reward everybody for going into that building you haven't gone into and turning the corner. And so to do that, we kind of needed some more stuff, and ways to communicate that stuff. So um one thing we could probably start with is Bradley, you did a lot of work, or your team did a lot of work to, as mentioned in the beginning of this blog, two parts to this. One is when there is something cool, like a carving, that you can actually see it from a distance. And the other is making new containers that you can kind of peer into a building or around a corner and see if it's worth going into. If you want to talk a little bit about those.
Yeah, actually, there's a third category too, which is you could kind of like arrange these by rarity. There's some of these you're going to be seeing a lot, and then some you're going to be seeing kind of uncommon, then some are going to be quite rare. And from the beginning, it was really important to us that it was fun to discover and smash things where it was appropriate. There's a lot of just debris in the world, but when you go into a building, there would be some things that would be dropped by, if you need cloth, the cloth will show up in dressers, and so you could use your survival brain to just kind of intuit where things would be. But we didn't go so far as to have like special kinds of containers that would have special kinds of things. So this is something that we've spent some effort on to, when you get into a building, there's a couple new kinds of containers. Some are just it's new art for a thing that we had before. It was just so subtle that I think even in our own play tests, we weren't sort of spotting and understanding what was going to be in that thing. So there's a new food jar it's white, like a nice glazed white pot that kind of stands out from the environment. And you'll know when you smash that, the rations might be in that.
Yeah.
And then there's also a couple new crates that are like gilded. They're like gold trimmed crates. And it's always exciting when you see the glint of gold. It's kind of an instinct. It's exciting to find those. And you'll know that you're going to find special things in there. And then there's a third level, and these are special chests that contain really rare stuff, and they're a lot more rare in the world. And that's this gold-covered chest, and those have been deliberately placed in places that are a little out of reach, or you're only going to find them if you went off the beaten path. And like all the stuff in our world, they're all placed, somewhat randomly. So you wouldn't, if you find an environment that you might maybe feel a little familiar with, you're not necessarily going to find the same things in the same places. So that's just there to really get that excitement, that moment of discovery when you've taken a little bit of extra time and kind of wandered into some of the darker and deeper places.
Yeah, and the sort of food vase. What did you call it? We don't name them. They're just a thing.
Yeah, they don't have a name. Yeah, you don't, because you never see a name show up in the when you're in the world. Yeah, they're really just sort of like, the idea being that in ancient Khazad-dûm they would have had containers to store their food in long term, and these would be a few that have remained, and somehow that dried fruit has managed to last for 2,000 years or 1,000 years.
Ancient first stage food preservation techniques.
They were really good at food preservation.
And that's another sort of mechanical thing we wanted to do, and this really relates to the game's tuning. While I love the gameplay dynamic of the meals and having to come back to your base in order to really refresh, I know that can be a little jarring for people, especially, we want our game to be accessible, and there's some people that just kind of want a Lord of the Rings adventure. And so one of the things we're doing is those jars, almost always when you see one of those jars, there's going to be a ration inside of it. And Westgate's going to have a lot of them. And so that way, when you're early in the game, and you're just still kind of getting used to the mechanics, you'll end up with, your pockets will have a lot of cram in them, which seems dwarfy. And then those treasure chests, the funny thing about it is how often we debated in development of the 1.0 game having treasure chests out in the world. And we were like, well, the dwarves wouldn't just leave treasure chests out. That's not very dwarfy. And eventually we realized, we're like, yeah, but gameplay, it's fun to just turn a corner and see a chest and go, ooh, and have some gold ingots in it. So, we decided to lean a little bit into the game fun part on that side. But when you see one of those and they're up on a ledge in an odd place, and there's an orc encampment right below it and a couple of wolves on your tail, you definitely go, okay, I'm going to figure out how to get up there. because they're usually really rich, and they also, the kinds of things that are going to be in them, we're really striving to tune them so they feel like when you find one, you're almost kind of fast forwarding. So those points when you're just sitting there waiting for the steel ingots to finish so you can get your armor and move on, and then you find one of those chests and it's got 5 steel ingots in it, and you're like, yeah, bonus, let's go. So
Yeah. And there's also the knowledge. Did we want to talk a little bit about
yeah,
that?
yeah, let's jump to that, and then we'll hit the box after. So and again, coming back to just, if we want to reward you for searching every nook and cranny, we needed more things for you to find. And so the containers were about making it really obvious that there is something there worth going to get. So it helps you kind of manage your own time a little bit and not feel like, I never really liked that experience of going into a building and there was about 8 crates and they all just had the exact same thing in them, and I just eventually go, oh, why would I ever go in the building anymore? It's not worth it. So now there's a lot of reasons to go in the building, but then we began figuring out, how do we have more stuff to collect? So the next one was, well, we always had books and scrolls, and we scrolls, I don't know why whenever I say the word scroll, I end up, I feel like I'm talking about scrolls, and it's like, this is not a Marvel game, but sorry. um anyway, so we wanted you to find those things, and so what we added a new mechanic, and we also really just, we felt like for our builders out there, we have a lot of ways to buff yourself for combat, and we have a lot of ways to buff yourself for mining, but we didn't feel like we really had a way that you could buff yourself for building. And so we were like, let's try to do both of these things together. And so now what we have is these special build lore bookcase and scroll shelf, that you can go out, you can build them in your base, and then you go out in your world and find and scavenge these build lore books and scrolls, and you bring them back. And as you think of them kind of like a treasure pile, but the treasure is knowledge. And so as you fill these 2 bookcases and shelves up, you can study them, again using the analogy, like you admire the treasure or honor the dwarf memorial. You can study the knowledge shelf, and that will give you a new buff, and that buff is, I think it's kind of fun. It gives you a little endorphin drip. It it just means that there is a percentage chance that every time you build something, that it kind of does a little dice roll, and if the dice rolls in your favor based on how good of a buff you have, you just get to build whatever the thing you were about to build. You build it for free, and you get to keep the ingredients and use it on something else. And so, uh, you know, one of the obvious questions is, well, why didn't you just make everything a little bit cheaper while you got the buff going? And part of that is we just didn't tune the original costs of things that way, and we found that there was a couple of weird things that happened when we did that, and it was impossible to tune it where you couldn't just go and like kill your performance by building 50 things in 10 seconds. So this one was actually felt both like it was giving you in aggregate the same kind of advantage to if we just made everything cheaper, but adds in that little bit of slot machine fun. You never know which one is going to be the thing that you get for free. So I'm pretty excited about it. And man, when you go and break something in a building in Westgate and find one of those books, it feels pretty good.
Yeah, it was when we rolled out the cosmetic bookshelves in, I believe, the last update. We knew that we wanted there to be some more meaning to that, and this was kind of already in the works. So what we've done is that we've created some new objects. So these feel like special shelves. This is where you keep all your best stuff, in your home. And we wanted to, just hit the theme of finding lost knowledge to a dwarf. That would probably be just as important to recover the knowledge of the ancestors of Khazad-dûm as it would be to recover the wealth. Because ultimately you could find wealth, short of Mithril, you could find it in any old mountain. But there are certain things that you can only find in Khazad-dûm. So this really kind of like, it adds a whole nother loop and another thing to discover. And you'll find some of these in different kinds of places than you might find those other things that we just talked about earlier. So, we have a beautiful art for the books and the scrolls. It was one of those things that like added a lot of dimension to the world, and it's really great to actually have them have like some meaning and some real fun gameplay attached to them.
Yeah. And that leads to the last thing that we wanted. Again, if the whole theme is being purposeful when you go out and explore and being excited when you find stuff and having a lot more stuff to find, we added a whole new gameplay concept and mechanic, which are the abox. I think that's how you would say it. Again, I can't pronounce Kustal. Maybe I need to get David to give me a pronunciation guide. Like, what's the A with the hat? Is that abak? Abak? Someone in the chat can tell me what an A with a hat over it is. So what we did was we created this is a joke. We decided what's better than having 1 or 2 buffs on your HUD. How about 6 buffs on your HUD? We're polluting your buff side a little bit, but I think you'll like it. And what we did is we created this concept of these small objects that you can craft and mostly collect, that the dwarf would imagine it's like a rune on a bit of rock, and by smashing the rock in their hand gain an ability. And so this is where we're going to let players have, for a pretty short period of time, you're going to want a bunch of these sitting around, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, you get a little bit of a boost. And some of these boosts are things that you could previously only get from the brews, but also solve little things. Like, how often are you out in the world, you're in the lower deeps, you're trying to take out a orc camp and you get poisoned, and for whatever reason you didn't have the scour ale with you, and now you're just poisoned. You have to just sit there and take it until the timer is up. It's not very fun. And so if you look at the lists in the blog, that's one of the ones. You can keep this little abak with you, you can consume it, and essentially it's complex game design writing of reduces poison buildup rate and increases poison recovery rate. That's essentially cures poison. You can cure shadow. You can give yourself um, a bonus to your armor effectiveness, to your attack power, increasing stamina. And probably, I think my favorite one is the free sprint, especially early in the game. I definitely collect and hoard those swift ones, because when you're before you have fast travel and you're just going back and forth between your first Balin camp and the Elven Quarter, just knocking, breaking up one of those swift abox and being able to run without your stamina depleting is pretty fun. So they're going to be rare, but you're going to bust out one of those new gilded chests and find 1 or 2 of these. You will find that the orcs are hoarding depleted ones, and so there's more things, more incentive between coins and black diamonds, and now the depleted abox, which you can use to craft new ones. You will be able to, there's just a lot more things to go and get out in the world. So as you're collecting those and then crafting those, and then in the late game, so in the early game it's going to be about which ones have you found and collected, and then in the late game it's going to be which ones do you craft ahead of a big fight. But in our first play test with this, we were about to turn on the forge, the Narvi's forge, and we knew a horde was coming, and so we loaded up on all of we just used all the abox that we had collected, and it definitely was, we felt a lot more prepared, and it was really fun to do. And this also opens up down the line more of these. It's a really easy kind of content to add. So we're really excited about this new kind of way to interact with the game, new thing to collect.
Yeah, and I just wanted to, in the concept of them, we wanted to take this as another opportunity to kind of try to explain how dwarves and the dwarves of Middle Earth were, a little different maybe from the other peoples of Middle Earth, and like how they would go about doing this kind of thing. So whereas it might have been like a medicine or a potion or something for some other people, for dwarves, It's all through the craft, and in particular through the craft of stone and gems and those kinds of materials, the craft of the earth. So we wanted to create something that like adds a little bit of reinforces the kind of the dwarven fiction, and stands out as something that's more memorable.
And it gave me an excuse to make up a whole new thing and not have to come up with a gameplay name for it. I could just find a Kuzdal name for it. So um, it may not seem like I'm trying to be disciplined, but I'm really not trying to name everything a Kuzdal name. So I decided not to call the book some obscure name. So we do their books. And I see actually Northrend Lordfang about the horde lore mechanic. I was watching Dune 2, and in the theater I was watching going, I need one of those worm calling thumper things for a horde. We don't have it for this update, but we have debated that would be fun. And we have, I mean, someday if we ever get a chance to kind of, sometimes games, it's always dangerous to talk about things that we worked on and developed and then it didn't end up shipping. But we had a prototype, so I'm going to do it. I just said it's dangerous to do it, but I'm going to do it because it's fun. We had a prototype of a fourth kind of song, which was a battle song that would essentially attract. It would like spawn enemies and bring them to you, and it was pretty neat. But like all game dev, you don't always have all the time to do everything to quality. But I still think about that prototype every once in a while, or maybe just giving you the thumper. Both of those would be pretty fun. So maybe we'll add that to some future ideas to think about. But going back to the exploration blog and the box, there's also a couple other little things that we added. They're not really in the blog that you'll find. We added one new ore that you will find, and that ore will be instrumental in crafting these box, these boosts. And one last thing that we added in is we felt like, for the amount of annoyance and gameplay, like maybe not annoyance is the right thing, the amount of pain you have to go through to deal with shadow vents without some upside to it didn't feel right. And so what we did is we went back to an old lore idea we had, which is if you're really deep in the lore and you've read all the different little books we've put, there's these little hints that Durin the First had all the same problems with these shadow vents that you're run into, except he was Durin the First, and over a millennia figured out how to beat it all. And that's where all those Durin lamps are from. And so the idea being that each one of these shadow vents has been that same place for a long time. It's just Khazad-dûm at its height had a lot more lamps and other ways to suppress that shadow. And so what we've done is created a new kind of crystalline crafting material we call Mahal's Gift. And you can find these at the center of a shadow vent. And these are going to be useful in crafting anti-shadow things. And I think we're going to adjust the lamp recipes. One of the things we want to do is make it a little easier to build the Durin lamps earlier in the game. It's kind of a late game or almost end game thing, and we want to pull that in a little bit earlier so you feel like you can do more than just build a plank boardwalk over all the shadow. So those are things that we're thinking about, again, going back to rewarding you for being curious and exploring.
That sounds really cool.
Yeah, man.
So
we powered through that. Go ahead, Claire. Yeah.
Yeah, there's lots of stuff to digest there. But I have a few questions that I've grabbed from the chat. I think one of the important ones that I've seen a few people mention is will the chests and the ore and all that sort of stuff, is that going to be a new game only type thing? Is it going to be able, like, people who already have existing worlds that they absolutely love, will these items still pop up in their world?
Some of these will show up. It depends on how and where they're found. And off the top of my head, I'm not 100% specific. The specific like methods that we do this, I don't have. But some things will drop just naturally in existing worlds. Some things that depend on finding the spot in the world for them may only show up in new generations. Um, I believe is the case. So like the really rare chests, I think is something that will only show up in new generations, where it's being placed in a location that's new. Um, and so that's there's it's kind of a mix. It's a little of one and a little of the other.
Yeah, that makes sense. Oh, that's also the kind of thing that when we're doing out the release notes, we'll be able to then
Yeah. Yeah.
Be
list
more
what.
specific.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
and one of the reasons we're being vague is we have the intention to get we always intend to get everything into existing worlds, but there's always, because the game has so much kind of user generated, you guys have so much agency over your worlds. It's it's not straightforward to inject things, old, new things into old worlds without being destructive. For anybody who played back with the original 1.1 update back in December, and we would do an earthquake, and the earthquake would kind of scramble things, and that was a really easy way to inject new things into old worlds. But over time, as people's worlds have gotten more elaborate and you've done more work, we started to feel like a heavy earthquake in order to inject content wasn't quite worth what it could do to your existing buildings. And so
Hmm.
that's why I think Bradley's answer is, the system is basically going to try to figure out if it can, it will, and if it can't, it will choose not to destroy your existing stuff. That's why it's a little bit of a mixed bag. But
Yeah, it's a lot safer for us to like add new space to the world because, you all wouldn't have been able to put something in that new space. It didn't exist. But anywhere we're adding something to a space that you already had access to, there's always the chance that you may have made some really awesome creation right on that spot, and then anything we added would just suddenly appear, and that can create all kinds of issues. So we generally try to avoid that kind of thing, and that's one of the reasons why some of this will only come about in new generations.
yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, that all makes sense.
Oh,
So
one thing that will definitely happen is that any new buildables like the bookshelf, and the shelf, that will be in all worlds. So when in doubt, those of you on the call, I'm assuming, know how to do this. When in doubt, if you're not finding a lot of books in your old world, you can still build the bookshelf and then go into another world and harvest books and bring them back.
yeah. Well, that's always the nice thing is that you can, and I know players do that a lot, is that they hop over to other worlds for resources or extra things, or like the
Your
stuff
farm
that's
world. Yeah.
yeah, or the stuff that's exclusive
Yeah.
to
Oh, that
Sandbox that you can bring back.
Mhm.
that reminds me, and we probably should have mentioned this at the top, because we haven't had a Forge Talk since we did it. But the since our last Forge Talk, we did put out a patch on PS5, to further lessen the instances of people losing worlds and saves on PS5. So hopefully, I haven't seen a whole lot about that lately. So I think, no news is good news, but I guess a call if you're on PS5. Please continue to let us know if you're having any save game issues. But we did put that rapid patch out.
Yeah, that, and thank you again to everyone who helped us by sending us information for that, because like as always, players
Mhm.
being able to tell us what they see from their side really helps us to recreate it internally, even, or try and test it ourselves, because that then helps us look at like what could be causing the issue,
Yeah.
and narrows down the search an awful lot, which is really helpful.
Yeah.
Um, so go. I have a few, I think,
Mhm.
cooking questions that I spotted. Story asked, "Is will there be a penalty for eating simple stuff, or not like sticking to your breakfast, lunch, and dinner thing? Like if you're constantly just eating the same thing and that sort of thing."
Yeah. No penalty. I mean, you'll still refill your hunger bar, and you'll still gain your health back. It just, the before we were kind of giving out health regeneration on everything, not everything, but on a lot of things, and it felt very flat. So, um, in fact, it does create one thing. We're still kind of playtesting this, but there is an interesting dynamic of you kind of have to do a little bit of time math in your head, because if you start building lunch at lunchtime and then you get distracted and you come back and it's not lunchtime anymore, we're trying to decide what to do about that.
That's just
But
daily life for me.
I know. Yeah, it's like, is if your dwarf is ADHD and you forget to eat. So the no penalty, but that's where we shifted it from being everything about health regeneration and refilling your hunger bar. And now it's getting your health back, filling your hunger bar, and then that extra bonus of like we put the regions on the sort of timed meals as opposed to on everything.
Hmm. Cool. Um, while you were discussing all the different recipes and that sort of thing, it became very clear that the chat absolutely loves cranberries and how valuable they actually are. As well
Cranberry
as
House is a great name for that one location. I love it.
but it was asked, like, would you ever consider adding bee or cranberry farming to the game
Mm.
to make it easier to find them?
It's on our list to investigate, and we actually we wanted to try it for this update, but it wasn't. It ended up being weirdly with game dev, like it's so counterintuitive. Some things you're like, that's easy. That's probably like one line of code and a 3D model, and you're just like, oh no, that's not as easy. We want to do it, but not this update.
Mhm. Yeah, but good to know that it's like on the maybe future list.
Mhm.
Um, do, 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 oh, sorry, scanning down through my notes. Um, oh, this is a question that Guy posted in the thread that I had posted asking for questions, and I loved it so much that I'm going to try and read it exactly as it was written.
Okay.
With the new cooking coming, how am I going to explain to my dwarves that they can't just have bangers and mash for breakfast, second breakfast for the Blue Mountain lads, lunch and dinner? So do you have any
I mean,
tips on
you
how to break it to
can. You absolutely can. There's no, I don't know, Bradley, if you got a thought on that one.
I mean, it's sounds like a pretty good way to live.
It's a good problem to have.
Yeah, you could
Yeah,
always eat those things and then also eat the stuff that will give you the buffs.
ooh, second helpings.
Yeah.
Well, this update is the first time we intentionally put an Easter egg in the game,
Oh,
and it's a
interesting.
really easy one to find. It's
All
not a hard one, but
right.
it'll be like within 5 minutes of the update going out, everyone will find it.
Oh, I'm looking forward to people finding it though. That'll be fun. Bum, 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 bum. Kind of, I guess, slightly off topic, but on topic as well. Vega56 asked, do you prefer campaign or sandbox? Now, I know it was kind of asked to the chat in general, but I'm also
Oh.
curious about yourselves now that you've play tested so much. Do you actually have a preference?
Bradley, I'll let you start with this one.
Yeah, I mean, at this stage, I absolutely do. Only because we've been, we've been playing this game as we've been building it now for a number of years, and I've played especially that first maybe 2 to 5 hours of campaign, maybe hundreds of times at this point. And remember when we first we first turned the switch on for Sandbox, and we had our very first playtest, and jumping over the wall in Aftermath and landing in a new location. And of course, it's a location we've been to before, because one of the things about Sandbox was just we were sort of scrambling a lot of the stuff that we already had, but adding a lot of it felt very fresh because of the way it was being mixed up. But just jumping over that wall and falling down into like a ruined dwarf hall or something was like, oh, what is this?
Mm-hmm.
It felt like we were playing an entirely new game. And
Yeah.
add to that, all of the other improvements that we've made, some of which are in this update, some of which we had already released in earlier updates. It just felt like a fresh experience. And so, yeah, I'd say if you've played a lot of campaign, the Sandbox has a lot of appeal. But if you haven't played the game at all, campaign is a fantastic way to have your first experience. So Yeah, I think it just kind of depends on where I'm at.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think that's something I've seen, like, because we obviously have lots of new dwarves joining us for their exploration and return to Moria, and they often ask because a lot of dwarves that we have been here since the beginning, and others are starting off fresh. They often ask like what they should go with, campaign or sandbox, and
mhm,
often people will say start with campaign because sandbox remixes things a lot, and it might get a bit confusing if you're
mhm.
diving in the deep end for your first adventure.
Yeah. I think in terms of like, if it really kind of depends. I mean, the question is my personal preference. I still find myself going back to campaign, and that's probably not a strange answer. But having played it a lot, it is nice. That I think my favorite. We mentioned that the first few moments of sandbox. I think my favorite dynamic in sandbox is in campaign. Campaign is just a kind of, you're on a in some ways you're kind of on a Disneyland ride. It's like, hey, let's go to the next thing. Let's go to the next thing. And that first time for me, the first time we played campaign that we played sandbox, that was really fun for me was there was no Balin camp. There was no tutorial. And so suddenly you're running around and you're like, oh, this is interesting. This is different. And then you realize you're like, I'm hungry and it's nighttime. And oh my goodness, I need to sleep. And I haven't thought about this. And where am I supposed to go? And then you kind of just pick a building and squat in it. And then suddenly that random building is your base for a couple of hours. And then you kind of poke one area in and you're like, oh, I don't want to go that way. So there is a lot that is fun for sandbox, but the work we put into campaign, I'm still really proud of. So I guess it's a hard question for me to answer. But if I were to start a new game right now, just because, like Bradley said, we put um, so many hours into playing campaign as we were testing. I think my epic, because like the stores tell you how long you've played a game. I think I'm at like 150 on the Steam and then like 450 on Epic or something, just from like testing. And you'd be shocked at how much of that is just the first 2 hours of the game over and over again. So it's just kind of how development goes. It's a good question
um,
though.
yeah, definitely. I don't think I have a preference yet. I think I quite like I love a story to a game, so I think that's why I quite like campaign an awful lot because I like following stories and narratives and also finding things like lore in the world.
Hmm.
I think
Yeah, I
that's just
think
fun.
I think campaign leans a little bit more on big moments, and
Mhm.
I'm not going to reference any specific big moments for those who haven't beaten the campaign yet, but um, it it's we knew where you were going to go, we knew what you were going to experience generally when you were going to experience it, and so we
Hmm.
kind of like lean on that a little bit more. And with sandbox, we're really, the objective is to kind of get out of your way, and many of those big moments are still there, but some of them might show up a couple times in a couple different places, and so it's, I think also your experience of sandbox is going to be different if you've already played and beaten the campaign once before than if you were playing it for the first time. um, so yeah, I think that both of them are great for first time players, but also like they cater a little bit more to sort of different tastes, what you're trying to get out of the game. So
Yeah.
more than anything, just we wanted to be able to have the option for you guys to choose, which one you wanted to
Yeah.
do and in what order.
Mhm. So going back through some questions from the thread again. This was asked by Batanet, Free Potten. I am sorry if I have pronounced your name wrong. But it's also asked often by the community, and I think some other people chimed in to say they'd like to hear about this as well, is they love restoring Moria, but there's often little debris left on the ground that some people just build floors over. Is
Mm.
there any thoughts, even in the future, about maybe a way to kind of just sweep those up out of the way to restore the floors to their former glory?
It's something that we want to do. I'll say that. There's there's the way that the world gets assembled. I'll get a little technical here for a second. The way that the world is assembled, there's a couple different kinds of ways that we put that debris in. And when we were putting the world together for the first time, we wanted to really make sure we were hitting the feel of this is a place that has been, abandoned and then inhabited by orcs for, many hundreds of years. And get that feel right. And in doing so, we used a couple methods that were harder to undo or more complicated to undo than others. So certainly, like if you put down a hearth, any that area around the hearth, it'll clean up one kind of that automatically. That might also be something that not everyone is aware of, although probably most of the players here are. That only catches some. There are some other things, like the floor itself might have damage to it. And then there's some other kinds of ways that we put in some of the debris. I will say that any new content that we're doing, we're kind of being a lot more mindful about what kinds of things we're putting in and how we're putting it in, so that we don't kind of have more of that you're like, well, how would the player be able to clean that up? And just mitigate that a bit. But I will say, that it is something that we'd also like to address, because we knew that restoration is something, and cleaning up and restoring Moria is something that we wanted to really have be one of the the gameplay themes. But then that means a bunch of different kinds of features, and we made sure we covered sort of the main things about restoring buildings and cleaning up the big piles of debris and breaking that kind of thing. But taking it all the way is something that we'd still like to do in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. I suppose. Oh, nope, my brain just lost the sentence I was going to say. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Oh, I remember now. I was actually going to ask a question. The amount of, I guess, passion from the players to restore Moria to like absolute tip-top condition, has that surprised you? Is it more than you thought there would be, considering you're now changing your considerations moving forward?
I'm actually honestly not that surprised, because even just within our team, there were there's a good mix, and there are definitely some folks that are really passionate about that. So it's always been a thing that was on our minds, and I'm actually really kind of like satisfied to find that the community at large feels the same way about it. And it really just comes down to, in game development, sometimes you have to make some hard choices about, well, we could do this, but it's going to be very technically complicated, or it's going to create we have to compromise somewhere else to make that possible. And so we try to draw the line where we thought, created the right balance. I think, moving forward, I think maybe that line could be pushed a little bit further the other way. So, yeah.
So the next question kind of leads into like another topic we were going to touch on in the notes. Duran Deaths was asking, and this I believe came out of a conversation that was had in the troll challenge thread after it was finished.
Oh, we should talk about
Was
that.
any chance of adding stone giants or other? I think they're pretty big, right? They're like outside of Moria or in the Misty Mountains. My memory, anyway.
That's a great question. There are some topics we'd love to explore that are probably tied up in future projects.
Oh.
Yeah.
All right, say no more.
Mhm.
We
That's
think stone giants are really cool.
okay, perfect. Yeah, perfect answer. Great.
Yeah.
But yeah, the troll challenge. What did you just think of that?
Oh, the troll challenge! The troll challenge is awesome. Thanks everybody for doing that. It's I don't know how I didn't realize you could build on the trolls. It seems
Yeah,
obvious
I
now,
know, right?
but I was like, oh yeah, I never thought to do that. So that was fun, but yeah, huge thanks to everybody that submitted for that, and we're gonna put together probably on social media a package of some of the best stuff. But I think you guys probably saw the post of the ones that we were most excited about. Uh, I don't know if Claire, you want to go through the names of the ones that were really awesome, but and in particular, I loved the videos. So keep the videos coming if you have the ability to do that. as we move into the next challenge.
Yeah, all the submissions were really cool. And Firemain Davy, I see you mentioning it in the chat. I did see your vase balancing troll like after the dev submission date, but I still think it's very cool. And yeah, like that, I don't know why I didn't think of putting stuff in like trolls' hands, including dwarves. I just
Including
assumed.
dwarves. Yeah, the ones those were great. The was that Scrom that put them where like you're standing in the, or was that Guy? I can't remember. But
Um,
my side award for even though we were mostly about the trolls, Jeljeka, Jleka. Do we know how to
yeah,
say?
I'm not sure how to say that. Yeah.
Your dwarf was probably the best dressed dwarf I've seen in any of the player screenshots. Like very well coordinated tinting on the armor plus the coloring on the hair. So I was very impressed by that dwarf.
And their base looked beautiful as well that the
Mhm,
troll was guarding.
absolutely.
Yeah,
And that leads into the next challenge. Oh, go ahead, Claire.
so I was just going to say the exact same thing. After this, I'll be posting challenge number 2, which is going to be a group shot.
Yeah, family
So
portrait. Yeah.
yeah, family portrait of dwarves together, whether it's like eating a meal back at your base or you're out adventuring,
Mhm,
mining together, that sort of thing. But also for solo players, because I know not everyone likes to play in a group. So
mhm.
um, if you're being a bit more creative about what makes up your group, that's also allowed as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, really interested to see, because I know there's like loads of pictures people have posted about like especially defeating a certain boss. So like
Mhm.
victory poses. So please be careful about spoilers as well.
Yeah.
Please use spoilers for those. But those images always look really, really epic. And it's great to kind of share that triumph with
Yeah.
players through those images as well. So
And
really looking
one
forward to
last
that.
thing, we've got remember, if you are interested in the Steam version, go wish list on Steam. If you've got friends, we've all got friends who are holding out for the Steam version, which is totally understandable. Remind them to go wish list on Steam. And we are posting content over on the Steam community site as well. It's stuff that's a little bit more for people that are like deciding if they still want to play. Whereas here we're kind of talking about new stuff for those of you who've been playing for a while. But there is content over there about how we went about trying to make an authentic Lord of the Rings experience, what the difference between campaign and sandbox is. So there's content over on the Steam page. And we've got more blogs coming because we haven't talked about everything for the update. So we're looking forward to in the next couple of weeks posting not just big announcements about things like the actual release date, but also talking about gold plating. Anything you think you can gold plate, do you want to gold plate it? The remodeling of the Desolation, hidden tombs, some other pretty neat stuff that's coming up that we can preview coming up in the future. So this was it's funny, we meant for this fall update to be a little bit more modest compared to the April update because we're working on things like getting it out on Steam and other things that are complicated that we'll talk about. Um, but but we kind of ended up not making it modest. There's a lot of stuff going in, so
Whoops.
it's gonna be a pretty exciting fall. So
Yeah. Yeah, there's like lots of really cool, exciting stuff to come. I think we're kind of out of time there,
oh yeah,
really.
yeah.
I know there's like loads of questions that have still gone unanswered, but hopefully we'll obviously be able to do another one of these again soon. And anything that I'll go back down through the chat and like pick up anything as kind of feedback the players have been asking about as well to make sure that the team get that as well. So yeah, we
All
finish up
right.
there.
Yeah. Thanks
Yeah.
everybody.
Yeah,
Thanks
thanks everyone
all.
for showing up. Like,
We'll see you again soon.
Okay. Bye all.
Bye.